It's, you just turned it on.
Yeah, I got it.
You're going to replace internal audit for the inspector general.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Okay, that was quick.
Yeah, I always forget. That'll work. Okay, you want to call a roll, Jenny?
For the June 11th meeting for the Charter Review Commission, Judge Adrian,
Present.
Diane Downing, the Honorable Drucker,
Here.
Dennis Kennedy,
Here.
Michael King, Tom Persiak,
Here.
Claire Rizzaco, Victor Ruiz, and Davita Russell.
So, we have minutes from both May the 16th and May the 23rd, which I believe have been distributed. That being the case, can I get a motion to accept? Been probably moved and seconded that the minutes from the May the 16th and May the 23rd both be accepted and adopted. Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda calls for a discussion of proposed amendment language for the final report as it relates to the Human Relations and PRC departments, which we have previously discussed some time ago.
Do you want to do the minutes from May 23rd first?
He did them.
Both.
Yes.
Oh,
I'll
well,
mess
I'm
around.
aye to both then, obviously. I was missing something. Sorry about that, Judge.
No problem. So, yeah, so, you know, we don't mess around.
Very efficient.
Yeah, that's right. So we are now down to item 4 on the agenda, which is to discuss proposed amendment to language for the final report as it relates to the Human Relations Resources Areas Department and the PRC. We previously have discussed this at length. The departments had gotten together and had proposed language which we have reviewed and have adopted previously, I believe, in its final form. It's now in front of you. If it is acceptable, I would ask for a motion.
I move to approve as written.
It's been properly moved and seconded that the language developed for the HR and PRC departments be included in the final report. Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Is there any unreadiness on the motion? On the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The record should reflect that we've been joined by Victor Ruiz and Diane Downing. Good afternoon, folks.
Afternoon.
We are now at item 5 on the agenda, which is discussion for proposed amendment language for the final report as it relates to campaign finance. That language has also been circulated and is significantly the same as what you have seen before. I think there may have been the amendment of one word so that it provides as written authority to the county council to take up issues having to do with campaign finance as the council might see fit. You have a copy of the proposed language in front of you. If it is acceptable, I would ask for a motion to include it in the final report.
I'll make that motion.
Yes, so moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Properly moved and seconded that this language be included in the final report. Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Yes.
No unreadiness on moving forward with this particular item. I just, as a point of clarification, we have in our packets both the proposed charter language as well as the stated rationale for including in this report. I know that was circulated to the commission today. I just wanted to clarify whether we're voting on both at this point in time, or?
Yes, sir. You are. Let me be clear that over the course of the weekend, I circulated amongst the members of the commission some proposed rationale language for the items that we're taking up, so that it would be clear, based upon what our discussions have been, as to why we are making the decisions that we're making as it relates to each one of these. I hope that everybody's had an opportunity to review those. If there are any questions about any of the rationales, at the time that I asked for unreadiness on the motion to accept the language, I would ask that at that point that you raise your unreadiness so we can discuss that. And so having said all of that, I'm going to again say that it appears that there is no unreadiness on the motion as it relates to campaign finance. If that is still correct, then again, is there any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. We move then to discussion on proposed amended language for the final report as it relates to the Inspector General. This particular item was a matter of some, what's the word I want to use? We were not in consensus as to a way forward as it relates to it. I have, again, have drafted a rationale for what I think was the, what I understood to be the position taken by the majority, but I understand that there are minority positions that probably would like to be heard. In order to have it fully debated this afternoon, I am going to ask for a motion to accept the motion, or accept the language as drafted, and the rationale that was proposed to go along with it, and so we can put it before the body. Is there a motion to accept the language?
So moved.
And I'll second.
Okay. It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 So we have matter of record, Diane. Yes.
I'm voting against.
Okay. It appears that the motion carries. The language as it relates to the Inspector General will go into the recommendations that we make. That takes us down to item 7 on the agenda, which deals with the internal auditor's proposal, which was raised with me just a couple of days ago, and I think Dennis may be in a better position to tell us what that's about, since he's the one that said it was brought to him. So I ask my vice chair.
Thank you, Judge. This was actually the outcome of a discussion that was held at last week's audit committee meeting, and we do have the internal auditor here today, so that we get all his recommendations straight, as opposed to me speaking for him. I'd ask Mr. Swaysgood to maybe come up and briefly discuss the proposed changes.
Good afternoon. You want to identify yourself for our record, please?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Corey Swaysgood, Director of Internal Audits. My department was created under Article 11 of the county charter, and I apologize for the late submission, but we were, as Dennis said, I was at an audit committee meeting last Thursday, our quarterly meeting, and I just kind of brought this up to the audit committee. They're very minor cosmetic changes, but I can go into them with the commission today if you would like. There's just two changes to our section. Section 11.04 would be one. I'm not sure if did the commission get the summary form?
Yes.
Okay. In section 11.04 of the county charter, one of the requested changes is to number 3, which guides our internal audit process through 2 different standards. And I've been in the department basically since it's been created for 5 years. And with my experience and also with the experience of speaking with other internal audit departments around the country, complying with 2 standards at the same time is pretty challenging, especially for a small department like ourselves. And I would recommend that we change the requirement to and/or. That way we put it on the audit committee to make that decision on which either we comply with 1 standard or we comply with 2 standards. So that's one of my recommended changes there. Is there any questions on that one?
Pretty straightforward.
I think it's straightforward, and I think it speaks for itself. But can we go back up to 2, where he says develop a schedule of department audit fees, which may be billed to each department as it is audited?
Yes, sorry, I started with the other one first. I was going to go into that one right now. Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Section 11.042 says that we shall develop a schedule of department fees which shall be billed to each department as it is audited. And here I am proposing to change it to may be billed to each department as it is audited. My reason for that is that we currently are auditing the same source of funds that we receive from the county executive. So we receive general funds and we're auditing general funds. So to me, it's unnecessary to bill back general fund to general fund. I do think it's necessary to bill back for other funds such as special revenue funds or even grants if we have to, if we're auditing in those areas. So that is my reason for that recommended change.
I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
I was just wondering because, as we take things and we charge them or we budget them department to department, why would we not continue to relegate audit fees to each department? But if it's all just coming out of the general fund, then
For the most part, our audits over the last 5.5 years have been general fund, but in the future, we can develop a schedule of fees to bill back to those departments that are not general fund.
Okay, so basically you just don't want to be from the Department of Redundancy Department.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And that incorporates all the suggestions?
Yes, that's all I proposed, yes.
Okay.
Your Honor, I have a question
Yes.
for you. I don't know if it's appropriate, but considering the point that this was brought to us, does this open us up to additional amendments that we would have to consider now that we're basically towards the end of this process?
Yeah, I thought about that. These are so minor that I was thinking that it does not, and there hasn't been a lot of people that we've been keeping at bay because of the fact that they had tried to present something to us late. So I think I'm willing to take the chance, but it's something I thought about too, and that I raised with Dennis when he brought it to me. this is kind of in the form that it needs to be, except for and actually, since we're talking about just one or two words in each instance, if it is the will of the body, perhaps we can accept the proposal from the department as recommended.
Judge, I accept it simply because, they don't want to read about themselves in a management letter or any type of thing simply because of two words. And if it brings clarification to what they do, I'm in favor of it.
Okay, you so move.
I move it.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we accept the language coming from the Department of Internal Audit as it relates to the changes in auditing standards and of bill fees in the internal auditing portion of the charter. Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Any unreadiness on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. That language
Thank
will
you.
also be moved forward. Thank you. We are now down to item 8 on the agenda, which is general discussion. Is there something that needs to come to the body's attention that we have missed? Okay. Janae, anything on your desk that you think we should take up?
Not at this time. I know we circulated, the draft report, so just want everyone to take a look at that when they get a chance.
Okay. What's our time frame as it relates now to presenting things to the council?
The due date for the report is July 1st,
Okay.
so that gives us a couple of weeks.
Okay. Since everybody just got a copy of, the language as it will be presented, it seems that we should take at least one more opportunity to come together after you've had that opportunity to review the document and see if there are any final tweaks that need to be made. And if not, then we're pretty close to finished. So if we can get a date, you're going to send a doodle poll out? Okay. Any other discussion on any item that's before us? Okay. That being the case, since it appears that there is not, we'll move to item number 9 on the agenda, which is public input, and ask if anyone has signed up for public input.
We have Councilman Dale Miller.
Councilman.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission. I would just like to thank you very much for your support of the Inspector General Amendment, which I think is very important for Cuyahoga County. And more than that, to just express my gratitude for all the countless hours and all the hard work that all of you put in. You didn't get paid a dime. You all took it very seriously. You worked very hard, and on behalf of the council and the county, I just want to thank you very much for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. And while I have the opportunity, I also want to express on behalf of the members of the commission and to you, Councilman Miller, how instructive and useful all of the countless hours that you clearly put into, as well as the thought that you gave to the matters that you placed in front of us. I think that they served as excellent guidance to us, gave us the opportunity to take a look at some really daunting kinds of things, some of which we were able to resolve, some of which we were not. But certainly the dial was moved because of the fact that we had the information and the material that you gave us. So I want to thank you publicly on behalf of the members of the commission and on behalf of the public.
Next, we'll have Will Tarter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tarter.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon, members of the Commission. Just as a taxpayer, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to present in front of this Commission and to thank all the commissioners for your service. Just to echo with what Councilman Miller said, it's a volunteer opportunity, but I really appreciate working with all of you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this process. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. And again, Mr. Tarter, I want to express the same kind of gratefulness to you than I did to Councilman Miller, because again, it's really clear that there was a lot of thought, a lot of preparation, a lot of consultation that went into the matters that you put before us, as well as a lot of flexibility to make sure that we got something that the council could really seriously consider for inclusion in the charter, and we're hopeful that it'll take the appropriate action.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your support.
Sure.
Linda Mayer.
Hello, I echo those remarks as well. However, I also thought that perhaps today we would have a chance to talk about or input a little bit on the wording. So I believe that you've already decided the wording without any public input. So let me phrase the suggestions I was going to make instead as questions, because maybe we, the league, doesn't have any problem with the wordings at all, but there are a couple of questions we don't understand. So maybe somebody could clarify them for us. First of all, on the Inspector General proposal, in section parentheses 1, it clearly does no longer require adequate funding. The word adequate was in before and it was taken out. So I'm wondering, since there is nothing in there that would prevent the council from cutting the funding of the agency if it wanted to, does anybody see, is it possible that I'm missing something in that paragraph? I thought it should at least say, through the regular budget process, based on agency requirements and available resources. Usually the agency can tell what money it needs in order to be able to function correctly, and then the budget is appropriated to try to meet those requirements. And I don't see anything in there. So can you comfort me on that level? Because our members will ask this of us when we report to them.
Sure. I don't think that there was a lot of debate about the language as it is. Perhaps if
we must have missed a meeting.
Yeah, because we did.
Because our
I remember it being raised with us, and
well, it was in our remarks twice, but maybe not on the day that you discussed it. It's possible we weren't here.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you all feel that that's covered by the language?
I'm just going to.
We can be satisfied if you believe that's covered, but if not, it might be a good little point to reopen.
Mr. Chair, I think I know there was a prior draft that did include the term adequate funding.
Yes.
I'm not sure at what stage that was removed. I will
and
say
why?
There were questions around what does adequate funding really mean.
Well, what does fairly mean? Now you have the word fairly in there.
That's a fair point. I think some of the concerns around what does it mean to have adequate funding, I think it establishes a vague standard for...
But now there's no standard.
Well, that's true, but it also treats the agency of Inspector General similarly to the Department of Internal Audit or any other independent county agency that has oversight functions over administrative reviews. So PRC, internal audit, and agency of Inspector General would go through the normal budget process in the same manner that all of those entities currently do today.
Okay. Next question. Parentheses 2, jurisdiction. When it says it shall extend to any employee, official, or appointee, at the bottom of that item, does official mean elected official, or should the word elected be in there?
I think any official would cover elected or appointed.
Okay.
Without specific reference to either one, but saying if you're an official, regardless of how you've come to work for the county.
So if the Inspector General is looking into problems regarding an elected official,
It's covered.
it's covered.
Yes.
Okay, and my last comment on this one is on parentheses 5, removal. And first of all, in the PRC proposal, you have such very clear language and brief and to the point. It says if he is to be removed or if he is going through removal process, we wanted there to be a public hearing where he gets a chance to say, or she gets a chance to say why, the other side of the story. And it just says the opportunity to be heard. What does that mean? Does that mean a public hearing, or does it just mean that you will listen to him in an office?
You know, anybody who is subject to removal should be entitled to due process before that removal takes place.
But it doesn't say that.
Excuse me. And when you're talking about due process, I think that this particular section gives more due process than most people are entitled to. You've got to have 8 members of council.
Super majority.
Super majority. And it gives the Inspector General the opportunity to appear before the body that's going to make the final decision on him or her to be heard before such time as they vote.
So the opportunity to be heard by council in public session, is that what that means? If it is, we're good.
Yeah, I know it doesn't say particularly that it's in public session, but I think that any action that's taken by the council is subject to sunshine laws, and therefore would necessarily, if it's going to, they're doing the county's
vote
business.
would have to be taken in public.
Absolutely.
Because in the PRC proposal, there's this wonderful short sentence which says all of it so much better, and this is what I pulled out of it. The council may remove the Inspector General for cause, quote, after notice and public hearing before council, provided that 2/3 of the members of council concur. And that's the language in the one, and I thought it was so clear, and I didn't think that this language was so clear. But if you believe it means the same thing, then we're good.
Mike?
Just one point of clarification and maybe one complication. But the language that was included in this, I believe, was intended to mirror the language currently under Article 11, applying to the Director of Internal Auditing, which doesn't provide for a public hearing, but does provide the opportunity to be heard. That's the clarifying point. The complicating point is that I believe under the sunshine laws, removal of employees is something that can be heard in executive session. Now, the vote would still have to be public. That would have to take place in public session, but the hearing to determine whether or not to remove could take place in an executive session not open to the public.
What do you think?
I agree with Michael, because on so many of these employee-related matters, you do have to go into executive session, so that's just my opinion.
Mayor Drucker?
Well, for example, in my experience, let's say a chief of police or chief of a fire department, if you have due process, it has to be a public hearing, and it's stated that they have a right to a public hearing. Because if not, then you can have Yeah, the vote would be public, but if you want the discussion public while you're gonna remove someone, especially in a position like this, it probably should say something about an actual public hearing. I would assume that from here, but then when you can assume something, it may not be clear enough.
So if there's any agreement with the point I raise on this, I would suggest maybe after the word present in the very last sentence, you just add to the public or to council or to public session.
Excuse me.
This would be a huge scandal if it happened.
Hold on. Michael, I think, and Judge, we need to get into why they would go into executive session. I think the lawyers need to speak on this.
And I'm speaking with the disclaimer that I haven't looked at it very recently, but I believe that the appointment or removal or discipline of any employee is a topic of discussion that can take place in executive session. Again, the vote actually has to take place in public, and normally when you're talking about this, it has to do with the removal of certain positions that where there may be personnel matters, there could be other things that aren't appropriately discussed in a public hearing. I think there are good policy reasons behind that exception in the Open Meetings Act. Whether or not we as this body believe that this should also apply to the Inspector General, I think is an open question. I think there's an argument to be made either way. But to the point of inconsistencies currently in the charter, the Director of Internal Auditing, I don't believe has to take, that removal would have to take place in an open session, whereas, as Ms. Mayor points out, removal of PRC commissioners would have to take place in an open session. So I think there's precedence on both sides here, but it's really a matter of what we think is the best policy.
Yes.
And I think where you can maybe run the risk is if, maybe the vote takes place publicly, but what if the chair denies any further speaking? If they have that authority to say, we've heard enough, we're just voting on it, then it's not really a public hearing. So I agree with Michael. We have to be specific. And if it means, because again, there's just so much room for assumption here in this conversation now.
What's the downside or the negative of mirroring the language that's in place for PRC?
I would. It's hard to entertain a whole host of hypotheticals as to what circumstances you might encounter where the council would seriously consider removing an Inspector General. I think having a discussion or a hearing to debate the merits of removal of the Inspector General would politicize that decision in a way that allowing for candor in an executive session may not. That could matter in a particular case, or it may not matter, because if you're talking about removal, there's probably some public rationale for that removal to begin with. That, of course, is counterbalanced by the concerns that, what if that removal is arbitrary or capricious, or what if there's some other virtuous motive that council might have for removing an Inspector General. But I think the likelihood of I think the public backlash for an arbitrary removal of an Inspector General would be pretty severe.
Let me ask one other quick question then. Is it possible, and recognizing again that we're talking about hypothetical situations because we can't anticipate everything that might occur, but is it possible that you could have a situation where council could hold an executive session on the sensitive matters and then have a public hearing on the balance before making its vote?
I think that is possible. There could be sensitive matters that council might want to discuss in executive session. If the requirement is simply that a public hearing be held prior to the vote, then offering the public the opportunity to be heard, offering the Inspector General, who's subject to potential removal, have the opportunity to be heard. That at least provides the transparency that's there, so that it's not all, you know, in a closed session, while still providing that opportunity. I think that if it's drafted that way, I think that could be a compromise outcome.
Any other suggestions of how we could deal with this?
Judge, you know, I firmly believe that there are certain situations that have to stay in executive session. And the council would then have to follow the recommendations of the executive session. And I'm not sure that Michael said it this way, but that could be open for public comment and debate. But we also have to be aware of the doors we're opening by allowing things out of executive session and that individual's rights. And that's what I'm focusing on there. You know, it works both ways. And I'm cognizant of that, and I want to make certain that even the individual has a right, you know, in that process. And I think that individual has the right to defend him or herself in this executive session or state his or her case. And then I think the council should then make their recommendations to the body. And then those recommendations, after thoroughly being reviewed by the legal department, should then be heard in the public. I don't know if I said that right, but
I think that's a reasonable approach to it.
Your Honor, I think the public hearing is a checks and balance. So I am supportive of the public hearing. Now, at what, I don't have an answer right now. It's at what stage of the process. But I do agree that considering the nature of the work the Inspector General does, that there should be a public hearing.
Rita? Yeah.
I concur. I think there should be a public hearing. I concur. I was just thinking the same thing. I concur. I believe it should be a public hearing as well, but I do agree also there should be some time for a private hearing with counsel behind chambers because of some things that may be sensitive. So I'm not sure how to go about that versus the public hearing and the private hearing or when that should take place. But yes, I believe that should happen.
Okay. Diane?
Well, I agree. You know, I'm against the amendment, so I don't want to opine on this part of it.
Okay. Anything else?
I think what you don't want to do is write the language so stringent that you prevent the opportunity for executive session. And again, in the context of what this position does in terms of investigating people and operations, and in some cases, people not directly affiliated with the county, vis-a-vis vendors, I'm not sure a public hearing is a place for that type. It may be, but I agree with the mayor that you would probably want it in executive session.
Okay. I guess my concern in part is that, how do I want to put this? If you have a public hearing and you are going to have situations where some miscellaneous information that is not appropriate comes out, that's a problem. But the flip side of that is if there is information that's going to come out that really the public needs to know why people are voting against, or I said voting to remove the Inspector General, which of course is a pretty severe sanction to start with. you kind of want to have at least part of that to be public, I think. So here's what I would suggest. We have brought forward language. We're going to have one more meeting. Why don't we play with the language for the rationale and the language of the proposed recommendation and bring it to the next meeting and see if we can find an appropriate way forward. And we'll work on that as soon as possible. Okay. So, and then the final thing is, and I'm going to say this, and it's not going to make anybody happy because it's going to really feel like, I'm punting. But at the end of the day, whatever comes out of this body goes to county council, and they can either accept it or they can reject it. So if we decide to send the language that we have currently as it is, then a county council certainly, and we got a member of county council present, we have the county executive present, they know what the nature of the debate was and the direction that it took. They'll have an opportunity to further examine whatever it is that we come up with. So, but we can take a look and see whether or not we can improve on what we've done. Yes?
We rescind our motion to accept the amendment in the language as written right now, because right now we have it passed.
I think right now we'll leave it as it is. If there is a decision that we need to make a change, then we can move to amend it, because it's not going to move forward before the next meeting anyhow. Okay. Well,
Thank you very much for considering this and thrashing it out a bit.
sure.
Because it was bothersome. I have one more question, and this is in the PRC section. In the beginning, in the first section of 9.0, section 9.01, it says in about the fourth line, the Personnel Review Commission is, now it seems to me the purpose of redoing this is to make sure that it's very clear what the PRC is doing and what the HR department is doing, and they shouldn't be overlapping. This was meant to clarify the difference between the two. And as I read it, I thought the Personnel Review Commission is authorized to employ persons in the service of the county. That to me means hiring and firing, et cetera, et cetera. And then it says the PRC shall be responsible for administering the personnel system. Then when you go down to section 9.05, it says the HR department shall be responsible for managing the management of all personnel matters. And I wondered if you could clarify for me, for us, I should say, the distinction between administering the personnel system and managing it. Because it looks to me, and I thought always, that the HR department was the manager of this nuts and bolts of how you administer the program. But the PRC was not to be in charge of hiring and firing people. And I wonder if there's a conflict there, or if you know of a distinction between administering and managing.
Mr. Chair, I'll take a crack at this one. I know the PRC and HR department aren't here, so if this is an unsatisfactory answer, we can maybe ask one of them to speak as a point of clarification. To your first point, Ms. Mayor, about the employing persons of the county, The PRC currently acts as its own appointing authority, so they have their own staff. They're responsible to their commissioners, and in that way they are an independent entity, so they're not appointed by HR or by the county executive. So I believe that's the language that's intended to address, is clarify. It is its own appointing authority. Regarding the administration of an efficient economical system for employment of persons in the public service of the county, the PRC basically manages the classification plan. So every classified civil service position in the county, their job descriptions, their job titles, their pay grades, the qualifications, all of that are developed by the Personnel Review Commission, and then the PRC tests those individuals and puts them on eligibility lists. So my interpretation of that language is that in administering the system, they are overseeing the creation and management of those, that whole process. So it's not...
Would the word, excuse me, would the word establish be better than administer?
Well, the only reason I think administer might make sense here is because of their active role in the hiring process. They don't make the final decision to hire and fire, but in civil service testing and instruction interviews,
they set the rules.
They set those rules, and they actually administer the tests. They administer the exams. So they develop the exams.
Okay.
Too. So whenever you say, I was applying for a position at the county in a classified service, I would apply for the job. The PRC would schedule a time for me to go take a civil service exam. They would administer that exam and then create an eligibility list, which would then be sent to HR, and then HR would do the final hiring process to pick off of that eligibility list.
And if you all think that that's very clear from the wording, I was just trying to see if maybe we're not distinguishing clearly enough between the two bodies. Okay?
Understood.
You all feel that that's clear? Because I thought it jumped out at me, but I'm not a manager. I'm not sure that I have the legal definition of the words.
Again, I don't want to speak for the PRC and HR. I do believe that they've come to an agreement on this amendment and
they're good with the words.
They currently, I think, have an understanding of what the roles and responsibilities are going forward. Now, to the point that somebody could have a different interpretation of what this says some point down the road, that's something, we should be mindful of. But as it currently stands, I believe those two entities have worked out the differences in terms of the roles and responsibilities.
Thank you very much for the chance to ask those questions.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad that hopefully we brought some clarity to at least how we came to the conclusions we did. And,
thanks very much.
You're welcome. Yes.
May I add a couple of
Of course.
things? Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, I believe that I can clarify the fairly allocated language in the Inspector General amendment. This language was an attempt to work with the county executive's concerns in that he felt that the funding allocation for the Inspector General should be done through the regular budget process and not some separate process. And what this language says is that the council cannot give the Inspector General a low allocation that doesn't reflect the resources available. It can't try to starve the Inspector General through adverse funding. Now, what it doesn't say is that the Inspector General is going to get everything it needs and wants, even if the county is in a severe budget crisis where everybody else is having to take big cuts. So, in that sense, it's not quite as strong as the earlier adequate funding language, but I would suggest that the Inspector General's budget is so small in comparison to the total of county funding that I don't think this difference is very consequential. I think that the county's financial situation would have to be catastrophic before the council would not be able to fairly allocate the funding that the agency needs. So I hope that provides some comfort. On the question about the removal process, I'm going to unpunt a little bit and just let you know that it's my intention to support the language as proposed by the commission when it comes to the council. I think when if you take it and you start tweaking it a little here and a little bit there, I think it's going to make it harder to get to 8 votes, and so I'm going to support your work. I do think the idea of trying to guarantee at least an element of public process has merit, and if we can come up with language, I do think that's a good idea. But whatever this commission comes up with at the next meeting, I'm going to take that language and support it in the council.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to know.
County Executive.
You're here, so never let it be said.
Yes, I just wanted to let you know I'm still here and alive. I know every week you all meet, that becomes one of the issues. I just came down because I wanted to share my thanks for the work that all of you have done. I'm hoping this will save me a little note to each of you personally, but I do want to thank you. This is quite a process. Takes a lot of time. It's not easy. There is some controversy attached, and the fact that you were all so willing to undertake this in the first instance, and then the time and effort you've all put in is obvious. And so I just wanted to come down and thank you all for the work. It really makes a difference, and it's important. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say today.
Thank you. And from my position as the chair, which I didn't really expect that I was going to be initially when you appointed me, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve with this group, which has proven to be a really august body and so many good ideas and such clear thinking. You know, you really did an excellent job in assembling this body, and they've all, I can assure you that everybody has given full attention to the matters that were in front of us from the day that we started till now. Most of the folks here have made every meeting, which means they did better than I did, but have made every meeting, and in the interims in between have been open. There's never been a time when I've picked up the telephone and called any one of them and asked for their opinion or their thoughts, that they didn't take the call and they didn't spend the time that was necessary for us to hash out where we needed to be. So I feel very blessed, you know, because, you know, it didn't have to be this way, you know, and certainly I've served on bodies where it wasn't that way. So this has been a very, homogenous group of people who were like-minded, and even when we weren't like-minded, we were able to disagree agreeably. So I think it's been an excellent experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Lou.
Sorry, one more time, only short, not low. For me, this is a very valuable civic class. And I'm very honored to learn from all of you sitting here and all of the people attending. Thank you for giving me this chance to learn this important lesson. Of course, when I found out whatever I intend to do when I work in this venue, I still continue to come. So I remember the first session, our chair mentioned, since we only have a limited time, so we want to work smart instead of working hard. But still, I really feel disappointed that we still have that particular topic we couldn't include this time. However, I'm talking about the one about
Succession.
Yes. And fortunately, we do have a very diligent county executive right now. Every meeting he will show up telling us he's here, no problem. But we don't know, a few years later, the next person would that be up. So I would like to repeat my simple, ordinary people's idea. Now we have that side leaking, and you just decided to move all the boxes to this side. I still don't think that's really a good thing for the government to work with. This is not really a good idea. Just like Inspector General, that office, I think we should assure that we will have very solid funding for this office, because this office is the one doing independent work to inspect all departments. So as a kind of an impartial third party, we don't want this office to be threatened. If you do this, you will not get the funding next time, which that happens to some other situation or even other places already. So I'm a little bit worried about that. However, even right now, our county executive here is very healthy, very capable. We don't know what will happen in the future. And plus, the next charter review is not just like 5 years away. So I just want to say that I'm a little bit disappointed about that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lynn. I'm going to say this about the last issue that you raised, and I'm going to try to be very brief. You know, at the courthouse, there's a provision in the law that says that the funding authority shall fund the courts. Okay. But like everything else, there are no absolutes. So when it says that it shall fund the court, it means that it will fund any reasonable request that the court makes. The court can't come in and ask to have a Trump Tower built for it. Okay. It's got to be reasonable, and it's got to be taken into consideration all of the other things that are going on in county or in city government or county government, wherever the court is located, in their requests. With regard to the Inspector General position, the question was, were we going to use the word adequate, or were we going to use the word fairly? Okay. Again, it comes down to a matter of semantics. If we had included, or were going to use the word adequate, it would still mean that somebody was going to have to decide what constituted adequate. What the Inspector General might think is adequate is not necessarily what the county council would feel is adequate. It'd have to be litigated. By the same token, what the county council might feel was fairly, the Inspector General might feel differently about. And if it was a severe enough cut, it might be something that the Inspector General would feel obligated to litigate. What we're trying to do is to be pragmatic and to look at this in a way that would allow for the most effective, efficient, commonsensical way forward. And that's what we want to try to put forward in front of the county council for its consideration, our best judgment as it relates to each of these items that have been entrusted to us. We don't expect everybody to agree. We don't even expect all of us necessarily to agree on everything that we've come up with. But we want everybody to know that we have done our due diligence and that we have tried to move the ball forward in a way that folks can at least understand the rationale and the reason for the decisions that were made here. And we understand and we appreciate the criticisms, or for that matter, the concerns, because they aren't necessarily all criticisms, that the public might make as it relates to the decisions that we've made. Some of them may be well put, but these are decisions. You make your decision and you live with it. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Thank you. That's it? Okay. We're going to send out a doodle poll for what we are hopeful at this point will be the last official meeting of the body. Connie, Zach, can you give me a minute afterwards? Just a minute. Okay. Last official meeting of the body where we can finalize the things that need to be put before council, and then we'll kind of have some decisions about our meetings with county council. We'll take those up at the next meeting. Thank everybody for their time.